Hello everyone, and welcome again to the next edition of the webinar series here at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. My name is Deva Rangarajan and I am the director of the Sales Center here. And in keeping with our past interviews, we have an expert again here, but from across the pond. We have Ms. Tamara Schenk, who is a best-selling author, a great speaker, a keynote speaker, and more importantly, a sales enablement evangelist who works for CSO Insights, a part of the Miller-Hyman Group. We are privileged to have Tamara Schenk out here share with you some of her thoughts about sales enablement. Tamara, thank you, and again, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eva. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Tamara, sales enablement evangelist, what is it that there is to evangelize about sales enablement?
Yeah, so my journey on sales enablement is a couple of years old. So fortunately, I had the pleasure to evolve sales enablement from an idea to a program to a function, to a strategic function in my previous role at T-Systems before I became an analyst in 2014.
Yeah. It's interesting. So you talk about sales enablement in different as a function and moving up to a strategic kind of capability within an organization. Can you tell me a little bit more? Because usually when people think of sales enablement, the first tendency is jump into what technology is going to help them do that. But based on my reading of some of your work, you are very particular about the fact that it is about a strategic capability within an organization. Can you kind of elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's the big danger that many people immediately dive into. Okay, what kind of training should we do? What should we do about content? And what are the latest technologies we need to implement and to provide? I mean, I'm not saying that this is not important. Of course, this is what's later on what's visible from sales enablement for the sales force. But most important is really how sales enablement is set up in the organization. And we just cannot say this often enough that a strategic approach really makes a very big difference if you look at the outcomes. So what do we mean by that? The sales enablement should solve a problem. It should solve a business problem. It's not just there to do stuff, to push things through the sales floor. I mean, everyone can do that. The challenge is really to solve a problem regarding sales performance, regarding maybe there is a transformation from a product selling approach to a more consultative approach. Maybe there is a transformation to a different value messaging model, to an outcome-oriented selling model. Whatever the case is, sales enablement should be the engine to drive this transformation. And that means enablement leaders have to clearly understand what is the business strategy, what is the sales strategy, and where are we regarding the current state of implementation. And then you come to the problem. So what are the strengths? So every sales force has strengths as well. What are the weaknesses? What are the challenges? And what are the areas that need to be addressed? And then you can come up in these conversations with all the different senior executives exploring these topics. And when you have done this assessment, then you can come up with a specific enablement strategy that works in this organization. And that means every enablement strategy is different in every organization. And only when all of this is done, then we also have to define how do we want to measure success at the end of the day, so that it connects to the strategic initiatives that are already in place. And then we come down to the more practical questions. Okay, what is it we really need to help our sales force with? What are skills we have to develop? What are methodologies we have to implement? What about content? What is it our salespeople need to be relevant, valuable, differentiating in every buyer interaction? And then what are the tools? What are the technologies that would really be helpful to drive the strategy? And then we also have to talk about the role of the sales manager. So all of this together, that's what a strategic approach would look like.
Absolutely. And I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. But from your experience, Tamara, the biggest hurdle to all this is top management support, right? Because Unfortunately, in most B2B organizations, from my experience, what you see is that as far as they're concerned, there's everybody else sitting around the boardroom except maybe sales. Nowadays, of course, maybe there's a CMO out there, but usually you don't see too many times people from the sales organization who actually have to go get the business in. And if we need to talk about strategically, from your experience, how many times do you have a disconnect between top management setting a strategy and sales leaders then making do with their own enablement strategy and misalignment there?
Yeah, so I mean, you touched a few challenges. We also see that in some boards there is no sales representation. That's a problem because a sales function works very different compared to all other functions. So if you have nobody in your board who really understands sales, then you will always have challenges to get the message across what needs to be done. However, we also see a lack in senior executive levels. So, and I think the right step for sales enablement leaders should be to talk to the immediate, senior executives regarding sales, regarding marketing, regarding service, to sit together with the sales ops leader and maybe this product, and to form this alignment, to have this conversation, and to get to a bigger picture, to a more holistic understanding of what needs to happen. And having said that, if all these conversations have taken place, it's easier to communicate how all these strategies will be connected to the strategic initiatives of the company. And that is actually what has to happen, so that somebody on a board level really listen. Yeah, so they don't listen to somebody who says, oh, I should roll out a new training. So that's not a board level conversation. It's not a senior exec conversation. It's what's the problems that we solve? How can we do that? And how would it contribute to the organization's targets? So maybe we should also look at some numbers. Why am I so passionate about this topic to get the approach right? It's really because it matters a lot. So what we've seen over the last couple of years in our research is that now more and more organizations follow a more formal approach, which is good. So it's about 50% of organizations follow a more formal approach, but only 9% follow a strategic approach that also captures their business plan in what we call a sales enablement charter. So that means all of this is condensed on 1 or 2 pages, and it's approved by the senior executive sponsors. And these 9% of organizations, I mean, they could improve their win rate by 19 to 2%. And I think that really makes the case. So that is really important to get the approach right. Compared to organizations that follow an ad hoc or random approach, they end up below average performance. Absolutely. So that really is important to get this right.
And I think it's absolutely fascinating that one of the nice things about CSO Insights is you always have numbers to back it up, right? So it's always nice to know. No, but that's one of the things that's going to help convince a lot of executives, right? Because we live in an age where if we don't see numbers backing it up, it's going to be very hard to convince top management. I remember seeing with shock the numbers, 57% of a buying decision is made. Now, this is a number that we all know in sales now. Right now, whether you and I can go back and forth whether that number is accurate or not, but in terms of that, still woke a lot of people up into becoming, hey, we can no longer be complacent about how we do business, because while we are looking at should it be a strategy, should it be align our sales enablement with our organization strategy, your customer is moving at a rapid pace. That's something that we all seem to forget. And in my opinion, do you think how many of the companies where despite having a good sales enablement charter, how many of them actually truly look at what is happening with the customer and understand that if you do not focus on them, your sales enablement charter is only going to be as good as like kind of gazing at your mirror. You see what I mean? So to what extent do they actually take a look at what's happening with the customers?
So that's one of the second pillar, or the most important pillar when it comes to designing the sales enablement strategy. It's really to focus on the customer first, to make the customer's path the primary design point for all the efforts that have to be taken. And there's a simple reason for that, because as you said, I'm totally with you, buyers are changing at a rapid pace and they continue to change their behaviors. We did some buyer research in 2018. It was really interesting to see that some organizations, they define their requirements and before they want to talk to a salesperson, that's about 70%. Another 44% are saying, we also define the solution we want to implement before we talk to somebody in sales. And then there is a smaller group that says basically we want to knock down everything on our own just until we can't avoid it to talk to a salesperson. Having said that, we also asked them, would you actually be willing to engage salespeople earlier? And guess what? They said, yes, we would like to, but they don't do it because they perceive salespeople as sellers and not so much as problem solvers. So they would actually need a problem solver, and they would like to engage with this kind of salesperson earlier on. So, and that's the big challenge in the transformation. Also, enablement has a big role in to get this evolvement right from selling attitude to problem solving attitude.
This is absolutely fascinating. So this becomes a chicken or an egg problem, because now I'm imagining that a lot of the people in the sales organization now thinking, wait a minute, we should be throwing more money at salespeople to be able to bring the orders in, without sometimes stopping to realize that's not what our salespeople need to be doing, chasing at everything else out there, but they have to be strategic in choosing which customers they want to do, but spend more time with the right kind of customers. Because if you don't do it, you're not going to be having salespeople as problem solvers. You're going to be having them as people who just want to go out there and get the business, thereby focusing on a very short-term focus. And it's fascinating that everything that you're talking about right now makes a case for sales enablement should be strategically thought of in companies, and to the point of even how we need to be managing our salespeople. But let me hold on to that thought before I want to come back into something that I've heard you say a lot, which I'm quite fascinated about, which is the concept of buyer enablement. Now, you talk about the fact that you have evolved from where, when I mean evolved in terms of your thought processes, where you've gone from saying we should be enabling our salespeople into something which you talk about as buyer enablement. Can you give us some more insights into what do you mean by buyer enablement?
Yeah, sure. So whatever we want to achieve in a sales force, it depends on how well we get along with our buyers and how many problems we solve for them and how good we are at doing that. So any kind of success in a sales organization is based on a happy customer, on a customer that achieved a goal, an outcome we have delivered a service, a product, or a solution for. So if you look at it this way, then whatever we do in enablement is to have valuable, relevant, and differentiating interactions with buyers along their entire customer's path. So that goes to the idea of actually what we want to do is we want to engage salespeople so that they can effectively engage buyers, so that they can be successful. And that comes back in terms of revenue and created business and bookings back in the organization. So it's just being consequent. If we're saying, so one pillar is having a really strategic approach that's focused on the specific challenges and a specific business strategy in that organization, to say, okay, whatever we do in enablement, it should be designed around the customers, because we have to be successful with the customers to create our numbers and goals, whatever it is we want to achieve. So that was the idea to come from sales enablement to buyer enablement. So it's actually, if you look at it backwards from the primary design point, the customer's path, then you could come to buyer enablement.
And that's what I really, really like about this concept of moving away from sales enablement to buyer enablement, because that would then mean that as a firm, that's easy for top management within a sales organization to also to align themselves, because if the buzzword today is customer centricity, then the idea is instead of telling them as sales enablement, which I guess, I'm not saying that it's happening, but many organizations might think that's only focusing on the sales organization. But the moment we say buyer enablement, now suddenly it aligns with customer centricity. It aligns with saying, okay, as an organization, we need to start looking at how can we help our customers, and by that we're looking at buyer enablement, and that's what I also like from the viewpoint when you say is that if that is the case, we are no longer just looking at sales, we are also looking at marketing coming into the picture, because salespeople cannot always be in front of the customer, and if the customers are doing their homework, marketing gets more aligned. So can you give us a little bit more insight into, when you take a look at your sales enablement framework or buyer enablement, what role does marketing play in this?
Yeah, sure. So the framework Byron and I used in our sales enablement book is called a sales enablement clarity model. And it comes in the form of a diamond. And we have chosen the diamond because there is no organization where there is no enablement at all. So usually every function wants to help sales in one way or another. So, and usually that means they push that to the sales force. And then from a seller's perspective, all these things are not consistent to each other. They don't make a lot of sense for them. And then sales will do what they've always done. So now when sales enablement comes into play with hopefully a strategic approach, we would have all these enablement services provided in a consistent way. They would be effective, and and to achieve that they are consistent, they have to be aligned to the customer's path, because that's, that's the relevant layer where we have to be successful at. And the customer's path, then you would probably say, okay, but we have many. And I say, yes, that's correct. So there are different customer path models that you probably need to consider in your organization for different kinds of businesses. And that's okay. But on a higher level, it's just important to understand that whatever we do, it begins with marketing efforts, continues with sales efforts, and it continues with service efforts. And this way we come into a loop when we talk about a customer's path. And that requires that we have this shared vision of success, which is being successful at all these different phases of the customer's path. And that requires marketing and sales have to be aligned along the customer's path, and then they have to be aligned internally. But very often there's discussion on sales and marketing alignment. The discussion was around, how do I align two functions to each other, and the customer's focus was often missed. So that's why I would always suggest look at it from the customer's path, align all the activities that have to take place, define the interfaces, and then you come to share technology, to integrated technology and systems and processes, of course, and then to integrated technology this way.
Absolutely, and I think it's absolutely fascinating, because what you're saying is that it begins with your processes, right? The fact is that the processes, not of your processes, but processes of the customer. And too many times, and I want your opinion on this, Tamara, is that when I see many people talk about activities of the customer, the thing that comes up is always the customer journey, right? And they talk about the customer journey, and I'm fine with the customer journey, but most of the time they just stop at the point the sale is made, or when it's time for you to come back and sign up for the repeat sale. But what is forgotten is actually the part where, in my opinion, the salesperson has created value and the customer has bought it. But until value delivery actually happens in line with the promises made, you're not going to have repeat business. So in your opinion, why is it that we still stop when we think about sales at the buyer journey stops at the point where they buy, but not continue on after that?
Yeah, so you make a great point, and that is one of the reasons why we call it customer's path, or you call it customer's journey, and not buyer's journey, because the buyer's journey really stops when a buying decision has been made, and we wanted to be clear that it's not the case. They will always look at these phases that include the implementation and adoption phase the customer is going through. So to me, it was always fascinating. Why would we spend a lot of time to build a relationship, especially in complex sales with a customer, to get them to a point where everything is fine, we have the best solution, they can create a ton of value, and we get the buying decision, and then we move away. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all, because we want to come back in an account and create additional business. So just for that simple reason, and most organizations have issues to grow within existing accounts because they're running away, and then they come back in again and have to build everything up again. So we were always suggesting, it doesn't mean that sellers should be the better service professional. It just means be responsive. You know, stay on that account, make sure that the buyer can create a value sold. And also in this phase, we need some specific kind of value messaging. It's what we call value confirmation messages. And this messaging should be played back to the initial senior executives who initiated this project in the first place. And when you look at it from a buyer's perspective, from a customer perspective, I mean, for me as a buyer, and luckily I had both roles in my past, a buying decision, that's just a milestone. You know, that's a milestone on something that's really important to me. That's the implementation of the solution I've bought, or the implementation usage of the product or services I've bought. So it really makes not a lot of sense to run away here. And it happens apparently because we very often have an organizational barrier between sales and service, as we had it long between marketing and sales, and we actually need this all integrated.
And I think that's one of the things where my experience has mostly been when I teach for companies and they happen to be in the service division. So essentially the nice thing for organizations to be successful so far is because just like the sales organization has silos, luckily for you, the customer's organization also has silos. Because when that happens, as you correctly pointed out, the buyer might say, this is the point where we buy the order and that's pretty much it. But then somebody else within the customer's organization now has to live with the consequences of it. So what happens at that point in time is that there's a kind of a loss in touch point even within the customer's organization. And as long as the customer has silos, okay, we can still get by with this. Because how else can you explain an organization that has, for example, that sells capital equipment, has a capital equipment sales force and a service sales force? Well, ultimately what you would think is that we should all be aligned to understand that the customer buys a product and continues to use the service. And I think it's very fascinating from that viewpoint is that as long as, yes, we have silos, but if the customer has silos, for some time we can be comfortable there.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Indeed.
That's a great point. So usually the complexity we have internally in a sales organization is a bit of the complexity our customers have as well. So
that's what,
it's a fair point. Yeah, we have to overcome the silos in both ends of the spectrum.
And I think that's
and interestingly, what we found. Sorry, go ahead.
No, please. Yeah, go ahead. What did you find? Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw in another finding from our buyer study we've done in 2018. So one of the 4 behaviors buyers wanted salespeople to do more consistently and more effectively was focus on post-sale, which means simply don't run away when a deal has been closed.
Absolutely. And actually, one of the things which we are finding, so we are doing work on a topic called customer success, which is exactly the mantra for customer success they call is land and expand. So in my head, when I first heard land and expand, I thought land was the salespeople landed, and then the customer success will expand it. But when I listen to the folks in customer success, for them, landing is not when there's a handover from sales. Landing, according to them, is when we deliver on the promises made by the salesperson. It's fascinating. Of course, I'm not saying that it's the same in every organization. So what they're saying is that they're saying it is a kind of a proactive, not even a kind of a responsive, but a proactive approach where they periodically go back and keep informing the customer about what the customer needs to do, what the customer needs to expect, and what they're doing. So it's fascinating. And while initially we saw this happening a lot in what we call software as service companies, now at least 2 companies where I've done some training for in the past, now are thinking, these are capital equipment firms, now they're thinking of establishing a customer success organization, but it is going to be set up slightly different from software as a service. So that viewpoint of what they're claiming is that you have sales, you have marketing, you have customer service, but all of them can be reactive. But a more proactive approach is what is needed, because the customers today want a better experience, but the experience should be added together with the outcome. So it's fascinating that we talk about this. And again, and for the audience, and I think one of the things that my students saw, although they're very young, they don't understand, is your diamond model, which I absolutely, the moment I saw it on your post on LinkedIn, I had to share it with my students, which I think is a very, very nice way of looking at things. And actually, in the interest of time, I have two more questions for you, Tamara. And the first one is, you mentioned something that is all your enablement efforts. Let's say you have a good strategy, you align your processes, but all of this is only going to be successful if your sales managers are also enabled. So can you give some of your thoughts on the challenges in getting to enable your sales managers?
Yeah, sure. So one is, what do we see in our research is definitely that organizations that follow a formalized approach to coaching, even a very dynamic approach to coaching, have much, much better results year over year. So they improve their win rates in a 2-digit manner. So that makes sales coaching actually to the most effective enablement service. So that's the data side of it. What does that mean? So it means if you provide all kinds of training services for your sales force, if you provide the right content at the right time, you have backed up with the right technology, let's say all of this is perfect. And you will probably still experience challenges regarding adoption and reinforcement. So even if you provide the best enablement services for your sellers. And that is a pitfall many organizations run into, that they don't consider the sales managers early enough as a very important target audience for enablement. And it's simple like this, you know, who is the most important role for a salesperson? It is their manager. It's not sales enablement. It's not sales operations. It's their manager. So, and especially the frontline managers are the linchpins in any sales organizations, and they're kind of an unsung hero because they have to implement all these things they are told from enablement, from operations, from their sales leaders, and from the company leaders, and so on. So it all comes down to this role to make that happen. So, and they will simply make their priorities and what they think is most important. So in here is where enablement leaders come into play. I would always build early on good relationships with sales managers to get their feedback. What is really needed in the trenches? What are the challenges specifically in different industries, in different areas of the sales force, in different geographies, in different accounts, and so on? So that's one step, to get their feedback, to get the sales enablement services right. And then the next step is, do we actually know if they're really good at coaching? Have they ever been taught how to become a great frontline sales coach? Probably not. So then it's a step to help them to become really good coaches. And then you can connect the dots and can say, okay, listen, we have here a couple of new enablement campaigns for our salespeople, what we discussed with you, by the way. And here is something we adjusted for you. So here is a sales coaching guideline and framework and stuff that helps you to coach exactly on these enablement services we just provided for the sales force. So this way you can connect the dots and drive reinforcement and adoption. Let's say you roll out a new value messaging approach. So you updated your content, you did the right training, you used it in your prospecting emails. Salespeople are now skilled, they're developed how to do this. And then, especially if they have to talk to different buyer roles, to new buyer roles, to new industries, they need practice. They need on-site practice and guidance. And this is the role of sales managers, to coach regularly and consistently on the behaviors and the skills you want to change. So So this way, it really makes a lot of sense, and working this way makes sales enablement really effective. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I would never miss out of this opportunity to integrate sales managers.
So one other question I wanted to ask, but I think that could be a topic separately if you have the time, is one of the new findings from your reports from CSO Insights about talent. Last year, there were so many times that I saw reports from CSO which talked about sales enablement. All of this is great, but if you don't have the talents, if you don't have the right talents on the field, that is one of the big issues that you're going to face. And I'm hoping that in the interest of time that we can actually have one more conversation at a later date where I really want to just focus on talents, because I think all of this, the biggest enabler for any organization is the talent of the salespeople that you have in front of the customers. And I hope that you will consent to come back and share your thoughts on that as well, because this has been absolutely fascinating. And I just want to say that for those of you who are also tuning into this, check out the blog posts that Tamara has. She frequently posts on LinkedIn. Connect with her on LinkedIn, and they have the diamond model. Go check them out. So you might have heard of the diamond model in key account management, but there's also a diamond model in sales enablement. And Tamara, once again, thank you for taking time off your busy schedule. I know that you're doing a lot of work, but I hope that you can come back and share with us some of your insights, especially about talent management.
Would love to do that. Thanks so much, Deva, for having me. It was a great pleasure to talk sales enablement with you.
Yes. Thank you again, and stay tuned.